Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Rock Enroll, Vision Point Marketing's enrollment marketing podcast. My name is Christian Jessup, and I'm the company marketing manager at Vision Point. And I'm joined today by a familiar voice for longtime listeners of the podcast, our typical host of the podcast, Katy Campbell. Katy is the Chief Client Officer here at Vision Point. And Katy, excited to have your voice of expertise today.
I know. Thanks so much for having me, Christian, and interesting to be on this side. And actually I've never been a guest on the podcast. So this is
Wow.
definitely new for me. But I'm a self-taught homegrown marketer for over a decade or so and have always had so much interest to better understand kind of the economic impact that then comes into the marketing space and the advertising space. So really excited to talk with you today.
Yeah, well, Katie, since I didn't even realize you've never been a guest on the podcast before, so congrats, first time. But let's actually, before we dive into, the evolving media market and what to do with budgets, I'd love for you just to share, 30, 60 seconds about your background and your experience and what's led you here.
Oh, sure. Yes. So, as I mentioned, kind of self-taught marketer, but my career started actually with Apple. I was worked in the retail store, and then my role evolved to actually doing internal marketing, onboarding, and training on the East Coast, which you just learned so much working for a company of that size that has invested so much in their marketing efforts. So, took so much away from that experience, and that then led me to be the director of marketing for North Carolina Football Club, which is a pro soccer team, both a men's and women's team, the NCFC and the North Carolina Courage. And again, just really learned a lot, learned how to do a lot with a little budget, learned how to do a lot for two totally separate brands, two totally separate offers and audiences, and really still hold a kind of cohesive picture for us as an organization. And then about 6 years ago, I made my move into higher ed. So I've worked at Vision Point. I started as a project manager, moved into a strategist role, and then have kind of come into my role now. But through that, I've had the opportunity to work alongside community colleges, four-year schools, grad programs, online programs. I've gotten to work on campus as an interim director of marketing for a small institution in North Carolina. I've gotten to, go alongside clients at conferences and for tours or at board meetings to just represent all the great marketing and enrollment marketing work that they are doing. So I feel like everyone has a connection to education, especially if you choose to work in it 40 plus hours a week. And so that has really brought me to higher ed and feeling so passionate about the work we do and making sure our stories can be told.
Yeah, lots of varied experience. And again, just so excited to have your voice of expertise on today's podcast episode. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about strategies for this evolving media market. And for anyone listening to this that has experience in higher ed, that's currently in higher ed, I'm sure it's no surprise to you to hear that, things have just really changed lately in the paid media world. And honestly, that's just life in paid media. Things are always changing and evolving. But the last several years, especially, we've just seen that things have become increasingly competitive. We've seen, very limited budgets. Higher ed's always worked with small budgets, but with things becoming more expensive and just with some budgets shrinking as institutions have to choose what to prioritize, you really have to get creative and have a really strategic approach to stand out in the crowd. That's always been important, but I'd argue it's probably more important now than ever before. So today we're wanting to dive in a little bit to those strategies about how you can optimize paid media campaigns and ultimately maximize your enrollment. So let's just talk a little bit about the landscape right now, Katie. What exactly are we seeing in the media market right now?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, and you set it up perfectly. But I think in the media market right now, we so frequently have client partners who think, I just need more budget. If only I had more budget, then I could be hitting XYZ numbers or XYZ KPIs. But what we're actually seeing, and for multiple reasons that we can dive into, but what we're seeing is just that the ad cost has increased so significantly across platforms, especially platforms that we use in higher education to reach our target markets. So, a couple of examples, according to a report from Forbes earlier this summer, we saw Facebook ad costs increase by 89%. TikTok's cost per thousand impression or CPM. So essentially the cost for us to get our ad in front of all of our prospective audience members, that in cost has increased 92%, probably on the platform that is the biggest talk of the town with TikTok. And then Snapchat, still a very relevant platform for millennial and Gen Z audiences. They saw a CPM increase of 64%. So we are seeing significant increases in the cost to get our ads in front of our prospective students or key audience members. Even when we look at some of higher ed's top performing campaigns, campaigns that are still driving a cost per lead, if you will, at half the industry benchmark. So instead of paying $100 for an undergraduate lead, these campaigns are still delivering $50 for an undergraduate lead, but that used to be $35, $40. So we still are seeing kind of nominal percentage increases on some top performing campaigns, even though they're crushing industry benchmarks. It's costing us more to get each of those leads.
Yeah, and it does require a little bit of a mindset shift because when you just look at it at face value, it's like, oh my gosh, our ads are performing worse. Our ads are more expensive. We're not getting as much for it. And like you said, even when things are still performing well, it's easy to look back 2, 3 years ago and be like, why isn't it performing like that? So let's dive into why exactly is that happening? Why are we seeing costs increase? Why are we seeing performance changes a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we can start with the obvious one, and that's 2024 specifically. Let's look at this year. We know we have one of the biggest events happening, and especially from a media perspective, coming just a few weeks away in early November with the 2024 election. And with that, we have seen like just a couple of numbers to put out there for you. For this election, we are seeing $2 billion more be spent in media than we saw in 2020. That's 10 billion versus 12 billion. And what also happened is over the summer, we saw, especially for the Democratic Party, strategies shift to focus on states that now they thought might be in contention for them with the change of their candidate. That includes North Carolina, Nevada, Georgia, and Arizona, where we all of a sudden saw some really big last minute ad buys in August and September, and I believe will continue throughout October right up to Election Day. And then you think about not just the presidential race, but Senate races too, or House races too. So, a couple of examples there. Think of Montana, again, Nevada and Arizona, but now also Wisconsin, Michigan, West Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania. We're seeing Senate control up on the table, or maybe those are states that could help decide Senate control. So, very important to both political parties, and seeing massive media money flowing through those states. The Ohio Senate race, for example, has already surpassed $300 million, becoming 2024's first non-presidential race to hit that ad spend. So it's not just this one big election that's happening, it's multiple elections that are impacting different state media markets. And because of that, inventory is tighter than ever for everyone that's not in the political space. The billboards that you used to be able to buy, no question, didn't even have to give your vendor a heads up, might be gone and might be booked through now November. The connected TV space that we used to be able to kind of pick and choose our run times and pick and choose, high traffic times, whether that's connected TV or even streaming radio, tighter than ever. That inventory may be bought up. And then in the digital space, you're just thinking about how many more advertisements your prospective audience is going to see and how much they can really handle. So I'd say increased ad spend competition driving a limited inventory in 2024, absolutely one of those key drivers. But the other driver that I think is talked about a little less, but actually I think will have an impact well past 2024, is when Apple instituted their app tracking transparency feature, and that happened during the pandemic. So during COVID, not only did we see people spending more time on social media and with media overall than ever before, Apple also launched this transparency feature. And within that feature, for those who are less familiar with it, Christian, have you seen it come up on your phone where it asks, do you want to opt in or opt out of tracking your data?
Yes, absolutely. Almost every app now is doing that.
Exactly. Even on your Apple TV, it's asking
Hmm.
that. And by doing that, consumers now have a choice to say, don't share my data, as in, don't let my data go into these massive algorithms that Meta and Google have been banking on for so long to then drive their ad inventory. So, just to give some more specifics, Apple's decision to change those settings on iPhone specifically caused an estimated 9.85 billion of revenues to evaporate in the second half of 2023 for Snapchat, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And that's according to the Financial Times. So that app transparency feature, which will be lasting well after 2024 and continue on, has changed the media market. And we as advertisers are still sorting out really how to address that now that we understand its impacts more on not only our inventory, but how these algorithms are working and then the cost it's leading to drive up.
Yeah, and I mean, as a consumer, I have to applaud the privacy that Apple has really emphasized. But as a marketer, that really threw things into array. You're right. And talking about how it's always easy to think like, oh, if my college only had more budget, you can't make up for 10 billion in revenue lost. You can't make up for the 2 billion that's being spent on political advertising. No matter how much budget you have, you just can't compete with these new privacy settings. You can't compete with a $2 billion election at face value. So it's all about being smart. And let's dive a little bit more into our audience because we've seen a look at the landscape. We've kind of seen like what are we competing with out in the world right now? But what do we know about our audience that are just seeing these ads?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And just to hit on something that you said too, when it comes to that budget ask, which I feel like so frequently as marketers is one of the first levers we look to pull. Well, can we shake the couch cushions? And are there any extra coins in there that we can use to support our marketing efforts? I don't want to undersell that and say that can't have an impact. It absolutely can. And you will hit a point of diminishing returns, of course. But it's to your point, when we're talking about such large scale for especially this media cycle and this enrollment cycle, is that going to be the only way to make that change? Probably not. And exactly to your point, it's because of what our audience is experiencing. We know kind of classic marketing, the rule of seven when it comes to impressions. And in higher ed, if we think about how frequently we need to get our messages in front of our audience members, that would be seven impressions to drive them to click, seven more impressions to drive them to raise their hand and inquire, seven more to maybe drive them to start an application, and so on through that enrollment journey. And that's dollar signs for each of those impressions that we're talking about and more competition. So not only are they getting hopefully seven impressions from our campaigns around a specific institution's upcoming deadline or upcoming event, but also getting those impressions from so many competitors. They are bombarded across the board with advertising and media and messages. And it's not just about getting our messages in that mix. It's also making us realize, thinking about an election cycle spending $12 billion this time around, what messages are they putting out there? Are they putting out messages about the economy, about unemployment, maybe about education directly? And then our audience is also seeing messages about, well, come to higher ed or improve or, increase your chances at that next job or promotion through this certificate or grad program or whatever it might be. And what do those two messages coexisting together do to the consumer? What psychology does that spark? So it's a really interesting thing to think. And I think you and I are both consumers experiencing it right now, probably ones that can see a little bit through it just being in this industry. We know that we are seeing it all of the time and how many times we have to see it to actually drive us to take a step forward with that enrollment marketing process or in that enrollment process.
That's a great point. And we kind of hit it on it earlier, but it really is right now. You aren't just competing with other institutions out there. You're a competing voice amidst the political landscape. You're a competing voice amidst hirers and employers that are saying, hey, come work for us. And like you said, sometimes that coalesces and works well with your messaging of like, come get a degree that'll set up your future career. But sometimes that might compete as well. So up to this point, it might sound like a really depressing podcast episode. Like we're sounding the alarm saying everything is awful and everything is getting worse. We're kind of using this as the chance to turn things around. So let's start to focus on what can we do as higher ed marketers? What can we do to combat the situation, to just like face it head on and kind of, make sure that things are still successful even with limited budgets and weird seasons right now.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm so with you. So it's like, okay, if this is the reality of our situation, not just in the next 4 weeks or what we've been
Yeah.
dealing with over the summer, but also moving forward, what can we do about it? So there's three or four strategies I'd love to put out there and get your thoughts on, and hopefully to be helpful to those listening. But I'd say one of the first ones is to pick your moments. When you don't have unlimited budget to be pulling, or the budget lever is not one that we can automatically go for, how can we make sure we focus our efforts on key times? So, just a few things to put out there is to consider pulsing your marketing campaign and your budget. So, instead of running year round at the same pace, or even running even 9 month cycles, call it October through June at the same pace, how can we more so focus and prioritize those during key times? So, a couple of quick things when looking at Google search trends over the last little bit. We see search traffic is highest for financial aid during January and August, and that's consistent over the last 5 years and stayed consistent even with the FAFSA craziness of 2023 and 2024. So, something to think about there is let's make sure that in January and August, we are making sure we have cost focused messaging in market, that we are making sure we're connecting students with the possibility of financial aid, or making sure that they can better understand that if that's not a process they're familiar with. It's the same timing for the term colleges near me. So if we're thinking about non-branded keywords for community colleges, regional 4 years, students who are going into Google and searching colleges near me, best colleges near me, highest value colleges near me, maybe it's them or their parents, the highest traffic for that keyword as well is January and August. So let's make sure not only that we are in market during those times, but also that we have awareness messages. Think of that rule of seven times again, each to drive them to actually click, to actually inquire. Even before those key times, how can we make sure we've got our top of funnel efforts running in December and July? So come January and August, when they're going to search for it, our ads and our brand is already top of mind. And then that differs a little bit when looking at, a couple of other different sectors in higher ed. So for master's degrees, when we're looking at graduate degrees, graduate certificates, master's degree, we see that traffic actually highest in May, knowing a lot of those programs have fall starts. Depending on your application deadline, you might be looking to drive people that are looking for you in May to that next fall, or maybe it's the following start date just based off your enrollment cycle. But another thing to keep in mind that people looking for master's degrees and continuing education and professional certificates tends to be higher in that late spring, early summer timeframe, as well as typically right around the new year, right after the new year, that whole new year, new me mentality. Community colleges too, we typically see most of their buying cycle, or a good bit of their enrollment cycle and registration cycle, happens just 6 to 8 weeks ahead of that start date. So if you're talking a mid-August start date, you're talking about the majority of those fall new students coming in over July, maybe end of June. So how can we make sure our budgets are strongest during these times versus stretching them out and kind of thinning them out throughout the entire year?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think on top of looking at, picking the right timing, picking the right moments, you also have to pick the right channels too. There's such a like tendency to think I need to be on every channel all the time. And in reality, you just want to be where your audience is. I know higher ed had a real hesitancy to get on newer channels such as Snapchat. And then when TikTok emerged, it was like, oh, do we really want to be advertising on TikTok? Sometimes there's channels, LinkedIn is a channel where we see a lot of success sometimes, especially with like young professionals, with adult learners. but the average high schooler might not be on LinkedIn very often. So it's all about, like I said, it's easy to want to be on every channel and to have a presence on every channel, but especially when you are trying to pick the right moments, the right timing, and to use your budget wisely, really look at where is your audience, where are they converting, where are they showing interest, and really having a powerful push on those channels. And I think that kind of puts us well over to our next topic, which is data. How do we know what channels they're on? How do we know what timing to use for advertising? And so that all comes down to how to use your data and interpret your data properly. Do you want to dive into that, Katie?
Yes, absolutely. No, Christian, I couldn't agree more. So, so frequently we're talking about, well, how do we find these right fit students? How do we find these prospects? And we absolutely can build custom audiences using Google, Meta, TikTok, Snapchat, connected TV, more to find, these profiles of affinity audiences to try to get in front of and move them into our pipeline. But we can also leverage our own data and an institution's own data to find those right fit students. And the beauty of that is that when you are going after a targeted list or a targeted data set, typically it does not require as much budget to drive all of those impressions to drive them to take that action. So it can just be another way for you to get the most out of your budget so that it's focused, not stretched too thin, as we've said, and that you can be more competitive during those key times. So a couple of examples of that. Absolutely, retargeting. We could not talk about using data and marketing without talking about retargeting. And we can do retargeting in a couple of different ways. On digital platforms, of course, you can upload lists of students that have inquired but not applied and make sure we're just targeting them with really specific messaging about starting their apps. Or we could even go even one level more niche at the next layer of the funnel, students who have started but not completed their applications. Let's target them with a come back and complete your application message. And we can do that across different channels. So they're seeing that those impressions where they're spending their time and intersecting their daily lives. But we could also do that without a set list. We could absolutely add pixels onto key pages on your website and say, well, if someone comes to look at a program page on nursing, let's start retargeting them. Maybe someone comes to your page around financial aid or cost. So now we start retargeting them with information about the value and affordability of our offerings in our school. So we can do really segmented retargeting to better increase our chances of getting the right message in front of the right students. We can also use lists of current students or past prospects to create lookalike audiences and ask these platforms to use all the data they have and say, find me more students like this, find me more prospects like this, and get my message in front of them. So lookalikes can be a really great workaround for some advertising platforms, restrictions, especially when it comes to that undergraduate market. The last one I'll put out there, we had some success with during the pandemic, which was more so focusing our direct mail efforts with a web to home type tactic. I think so frequently in higher ed, our direct mail or kind of physical collateral is a desired piece. They look nice. We know its impact it can have in the mailbox, but it can be expensive to send out, to produce. And so with that, you can do a really targeted direct mail effort. You can put essentially a pixel on your landing page, on your application page, maybe on one of those key visit pages, whatever it might be, and then say, just to the users that come to that page, match their IP address to a physical address, and now send them this postcard within, a 1 week time frame. And it's kind of where marketing can get a little creepy, if you will, if you're, being consumers too. I've been that person that has received the postcard and been like, did they hear me? How did they know? And typically, I'd say probably using a web to home type tactic where they're matching my IP address to my physical location and then getting a direct mail piece in my mailbox. And we want to be first to mailbox. That's key too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think with Apple's new privacy features, it really does require a little bit of creativity. And it's such a great starting point using your own data, using your own list, because then you're starting from what you know you have, from what you have permission to use, and not relying on features that platforms may or may not have access to, depending on a user's opt-in settings. So Love all of those tactics. Like you said, sometimes toes the line between creepy and cool, but really is an effective tactic for reaching those prospects. And speaking of like using what you have, I think such an underrated part of media is the organic side of media. You know, you can do paid ads all you want, but it's such a better tactic to complement those with organic, especially on channels where you do see organic performing really well. TikTok is all about organic. You can put up these nice professional ads on TikTok, but when people go to TikTok, more often than not, they're going to that channel because they want to see the organic, the natural student testimonies, someone on campus just walking around talking about their experience. And whether you do that via a paid ad or do that purely posting organically on your channel, having an organic presence on something like TikTok is so key.
I think you're spot on, Christian. So, as much as we've been talking about paid media so far, when we're thinking about all of the pipelines that can help fill your enrollment funnel and fill your marketing funnel, organic is absolutely a part of that. And that can be, to your point, organic social. And thinking of what are we posting on all of our channels, that's not costing us anything on a paid media side. It's not costing you anything of a hard expense within the platforms to put that out there, but it absolutely has an influence on the consumer. And then even diving into that one layer deeper, when we typically think of search engine optimization or SEO, usually referring to organic efforts, historically, that mindset has been Google, 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 maybe a smidge of Bing, but Google, Google, Google. And that still stands true. Google tends to still is continued to be a really dominant search platform, especially with their now enhancements with Google AI search. People are real. I was listening to a podcast the other day where they were going off about how helpful that's been. I think doing the Google SEO efforts is vital, and it allows us to not only meet the consumer where they are on the platform that they're using, but appear as a resource for them. Maybe our SEO efforts are focused on answering a question for them. How much does college cost? How do I pay for college? And then that links to a specific article or landing page from the institution that helps answer that question. And thus the institution is becoming a resource. So I think and one other thing I'll say about Google is we've seen historically investing in SEO efforts on Google is similar to investing in the stock market. The longer you do it, even at small amounts, it has this compounding interest return, and Google tends to prioritize and give higher scores to pages and domains that have been doing this and optimizing over time. So the sooner you start, the better. But I think where you were getting, which is so key, is now SEO cannot be thought of as Google only, and we've been thinking this for some time. It is absolutely going to dominate the TikTok space as well. And even if there is a change to TikTok, it will just shift, I truly believe, to YouTube or Instagram very quickly. But seeing as TikTok has been here to stay for the last few years and looks like it's going to continue to be, thinking of your organic search efforts on TikTok are key. And that's because when looking at Gen Z, so think of students born after 1997, 64% of Gen Z consumers use TikTok for searching. Millennials, 49%. And then Gen X, it drops down to about under 30%. But for those up and coming undergraduates, for those up and coming grad students, for those adult learners, we're talking in their late 20s in that Gen Z category and younger. TikTok is such a primary source for organic searching, and it's where they're looking to better understand products, offerings, a school's culture, if they want to be there, if it's appealing to them. So we do need to think about TikTok, not only from a paid perspective, how can we get ads in front of prospects, but also our organic TikTok efforts. That can include hashtags, that can include key or search keywords that we need to make sure we're hitting on when trends are big. And even after trends pass, how are we making sure our organic efforts on TikTok are matching what users are searching for?
Yeah, and I think you're starting to see even search engines like Google prioritize platforms like that. For a while, and even still to this day, you might search a question and a Reddit post will come up because people cared about what they see on Reddit and what users were commenting there. And you're starting to see the same thing where you might Google a question or Google a campus, and the first results are a TikTok video, a Facebook post. And so, yeah, like you said, it's so interesting because SEO of course, refers to what you do on the website, but it's becoming much more expansive than that because search engines are prioritizing and starting to showcase all of these platforms where prospects rely on getting information.
It's even interesting to your point. I was reading a Wall Street Journal article the other day that was referring to even how Gen Z and Gen Alpha are even saying Google less in the same way, I refer to anytime I search for something, I'm like, oh, I Googled it. Oh, I Googled Christian Jessup. Oh, I Googled Vision Point Marketing. Oh, I Googled College of DuPage. But actually now even just more of an anecdotal note, but that generation is going back to just searching because it's less dominant on just Google.
Wow, that's fascinating. I'd not heard that. That's
Here,
gonna make me really think twice whenever I hear that now.
feel
Um,
old.
Right, exactly. So we talked about SEO has a lot of meanings, but going back a little bit towards the website side of things, besides optimizing it, whether through blog posts, whether through program pages, let's talk about conversion rate optimizations. What can you do on a website to kind of maximize conversions?
Yeah, absolutely great question. So kind of staying in this category of things that we own. We can own our SEO efforts. We can also own our landing pages. And on our landing pages, everything we do in the paid and organic space drives users to these pages. And what happens on those pages can make such a difference versus how many people are moving into our funnel or how many people are, as we call in the marketing world, bouncing or quickly leaving to go find something else. So we really recommend instituting conversion rate optimization or CRO practices. And what CRO techniques do is they really look at the website and landing page experience for your visitors. They're looking at things like one of my favorites, rage click analysis. Think of when you're clicking on one button over and over again and it's not doing the action you want it to do. That can drive you to leave a web page. Think about live recordings where we could look at how a user is interacting with the landing page. Are they finding the information they need to then raise their hand, or are they leaving to go find it elsewhere? Even things like looking at heat maps of where users are spending time so that we know what information is probably the most important to them or giving them the most value. But if you think about, we've been talking about how hard it is to find users and drive them to even come to your landing page. If you can make a small percentage change on how many of those users that come to your landing page raise their hand, it can be a huge difference as to how many users then move into your funnel or start their applications and take that desired action. So highly recommend CRO because just like the SEO efforts and the organic efforts we were talking about, those are not media budget dependent. Those are efforts that can have a huge impact, even if your budget stays the exact same. So when we're thinking about, okay, well, if you can never have enough budget, what else could I be doing that is not budget dependent? Think about what you own or your organic efforts, your SEO efforts, website and social, and then making sure you're making the most of those landing pages. And CRO provides you the data to do that.
I love that. And that's really a good summary of what we've kind of talked about today. Things are really evolving, but leveraging organic social, choosing the right places to be on with your ads at the right time, and these organic things such as SEO, such as conversion rate optimization, it really can kind of maximize the return on your investment and really help you reach audiences in the best way. Katie, I kind of want to throw at you what you've done to some past guests, which is like a rapid fire question. You've not had a chance to prepare for this, so hopefully nothing too crazy. But I did just want to ask you, what is something that's really caught your eye in the media landscape? That could either be like a unique tactic that a company used, or it could be a really creative ad approach that you'd not seen before. So whether it's on the creative side or the actual tactile, like putting in market side, what's something that's really caught your eye recently?
Yeah, oh, great question. So one that always stays top of mind because I think one brand did it really successfully, and I haven't seen other brands really be able to replicate it. But do you remember the Progressive Mayhem ads? They had
Yes.
Mayhem was this character, and essentially he would cause riot, wreak havoc so that it would emphasize how important having insurance was, no matter what mayhem comes your way. And a couple of things about that. One is it was um it was so unique and just its comedic aspect, still true to the brand, but captured a user's attention almost to the point that like it think of the amount of times a commercial has actually made you laugh. And I think they did a great job of that. But what that campaign did that I think was really special was they really leaned into sequential messaging to tell a story. So in higher ed, when we talk about sequential messaging, sometimes we'll say, okay, well, if a user sees, a message about affordability first. The next time, let's make sure they see a message about programs. And then the next time, let's make sure they see a message about access. Great. That has worked and that has shown to be really appealing to our consumers so that they're not getting ad fatigue and they are feeling like they're learning more as they go. But what Progressive did with the Mayhem campaign, which I thought was so interesting, is they really blasted like part one of that story. And essentially, they would show you mayhem at home. Okay, so he's causing mayhem to your house. They would run that in market for, say, 8 to 10 weeks. They would run that for a cycle. And then the next 8 to 10 weeks, they would actually stop all of those ads and they would run part two of that story. And they would now show that same family driving to their next location to get away from the mayhem at home, but now mayhem's in their car. And they would run that for 8 to 10 weeks and then on to the next cycle. And it was almost this mini series that they created through their commercials, which I just thought was a brilliant way to think differently about such a traditional ad type of TV and even now how you can manipulate that through streaming and those buying cycles. So that campaign has been sticking with me just when thinking about how to story tell differently for higher ed through kind of a progressive series of ads.
I love that. And it's like, I'm a big movie guy and like the Marvel Cinematic Universe is so big. All these franchises are so big right now. And so as a consumer, it kind of makes you feel like you're a part of something, which is a weird thing to say about advertising, but it's like, oh my gosh, like you remember from the last time and now it's this time. And so that's fascinating to see how Progressive kind of took that approach to where, any given ad you're going to be able to keep up with. But at the same time, if you have the foreknowledge of what happened before, it's so much fun to watch. And I'd never considered that. Love that.
No, I love you're exactly right. It was like taking a note from how Marvel has designed this 25 movie world, yet you still feel attached to each individual one, or you can still just go see each individual one. So thinking about doing that on a in a micro size, especially because I think latest stats that we saw is that we're working with a 7 second attention span, if that. So how can we do that so quickly? So yes, just that's been one that's been sticking with me.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up today?
Yeah, no, I think just would encourage all institutions and organizations when they're thinking about their upcoming marketing, again, not just for these next couple of critical weeks, which are also not only critical in the media market, but probably critical to their enrollment cycles. And after that, a lot of these media trends will probably be here to stay. It's not like we expect to see a huge drop in costs come, mid-November. We'll still see a continuation on, but just leverage market-driven budgeting, utilize your data and see how that can allow you to prioritize, focus on organic, focus on what you own, optimize for conversions, maximize that return. And if you can track alongside all of that to really show the impact of it, that ROI, those are things we really help a lot of our clients with, is just making sure then they can tell the story of how all of this happened and how they responded to the market. Because, marketing, I believe, is really just this combo of economics and psychology to really drive users to make a decision. And with higher ed, we have the great advantage or the great opportunity to connect them to education, which really couldn't be a better product to connect them with, in my opinion.
Absolutely. What a great way to wrap things up. And Katie, thank you so much again for being on the opposite side of the mic today and really providing us some expertise about this. And thank you to all our listeners as well for following along. If you want to keep the conversation going, you can email us at info@visionpointmarketing.com, or you can visit our website, visionpointmarketing.com. We'd love to talk further with you about, what we're seeing in the marketplace and how we could help with your specific situation at your institution as well. So thank you again for listening and have a great rest of your day.